So what I'm going to do is just view the speaker. And I can see why is that working like that? That's not liaison speaker. All right. We'll begin with the Torah portion this week. Every week of Sefer Breshit is always fun. Always filled with stories that sometimes challenge us, sometimes just amuse us, sometimes perplex us. If you remember last week, at the end of last week, just before the commercial break, Jacob leaves home, right? After having tricked his father into giving him the blessing for the blessing after he'd already bought the birthright from his brother Esau earlier in the Torah portion. And so it says he comes upon a place, and we'll skip all the midrash right now, but he lays down to sleep, and he has a dream. And in this dream, he sees this ladder or stairway, probably more like a stairway than a ladder. It's usually translated as ladder, going up to heaven with the angels of God going up and coming down. All right. This imagery of the messengers of God and God's control over the world, it's clear that's what's part of the intent there. But Jacob says he didn't realize that this was a holy place, and he promises God if he watches over him and brings him back, that he will give a tithe to God, build an altar in this place, etc. And so he goes then on the way to Padan Aram, to his mother's side of the family's heritage. And once again, surprise, surprise, he comes to the village well. Right? So we had that with Eliezer, the servant of Abraham. Now we have it with Jacob. And he spies this pretty young lady named Rachel, and she invites him home. And Lavan, her brother, her uncle, excuse me, Lavan is Rivka's brother. So it's Lavan is her father. I'm getting old as I go along, forget everything. Okay, so they bring him into the household. He works for a while, tending sheep for his father-in-law, and they finally say, I can't have you doing this for nothing. I never understood that, because Lavan is a bit of a cheat. But anyway, let's make a deal. What kind of wages? And so Lavan has two daughters. The older one is named Leah, and the other one is named Rachel. And there's something that's not really clear what is the intent, but there's something about the eyes of Leah. One of the midrashic treatments of it was that the two girls knew that Yitzchak, Isaac, had two sons, and Lavan had two daughters. So obviously the best thing in the world, cousins got married all the time. So the older daughter would marry the older son of Isaac, and the younger daughter would marry the younger son. Okay? But the older son, of course, was Esau. And they already knew that he is a potential wanted list, for robbery and murder and all these kinds of terrible deeds. And Leah, being older, was destined to marry him. So she cried a lot. And therefore her eyes had problems. But be that as it may. Jacob is very clearly in love with Rachel. Rachel, so he says, all right, my wages will be, I'll work for you for 7 years. And at the end of those 7 years, you will give me your daughter Rachel, for a wife. So 7 years pass in a blink of an eye. When you're in love, right? Time passes very quickly sometimes. So comes the day, actually comes the night. So they have the ceremony, It comes the night, and he gets up in the morning, and it's not Rachel in bed with him, but it's Leah. And he's a little bit upset, and he goes back to Lavan. He says, "What did you do to me? What did you trick? How'd you trick me? Why are you doing such a thing?" He says, "I don't know about where you come from, but in our locale, the older kid gets married first, then the younger. The younger doesn't jump the gun over the." So now listen, what do we got going on here? We have Jacob, who jumped over his brother Esau. The younger kind of jumped over him, supplanted him. Lavan is kind of criticizing Jacob, saying, here we don't do it like that. Furthermore, how did Jacob trick his father Isaac? I told you last week to think about it for this week.
He put on lambs or goat's wool.
Yeah, he got disguised, and that sounds like a terrible disguise. Why did it work?
Because
what?
You heard his voice.
Heard his voice. Well, that's the voice of Jacob. That's what was throwing Isaac off. He almost got saw through the costume, the disguise. What was Isaac's condition at that time?
He's blind.
He's blind. He couldn't see. So he couldn't see who was underneath the disguise. It's nighttime. There are no electric lights. The bride is all bedecked. Jacob can't see who it really is. So just as he tricked his father, he was tricked. I think the Torah is giving a verdict. He may have had best intentions. There may have been good reasons behind what he and his mother did, but nonetheless, it was wrong. And because of that, because of what follows suit after this, because Jacob complains to Laban, and Laban says, "Okay, you work. When the 7 days for the first wife is over, you'll marry the sister, and you work another 7 years." Okay, all right. So Jacob does that. And he agrees to that, but it's clear from this, he loves Rachel. He puts up with Leah. So again, with the storyline is that Rachel can't get pregnant, but Leah is able to get pregnant relatively easily. So she has 1 child, 2 children, 3 children, and more children. So Rachel, who sees that she's barren, seems to be barren, so she says, "All right, give me a child." And Jacob says, "What are you looking to me for? It's not my fault." It's always not the man's fault. It's always the woman's fault. All right? Right, ladies? So, but he does have children with his other wife. So there's some grounds for his contention. But yeah, anyway, so she's marry my maid, and you will be, I will be built through her. We saw that with Sarah and Hagar. And then when Leah sees that she's not having any more children, she says, "Okay, you do it with my maid." So now he's got 2 full wives, 2 concubine wives, and lots of kids popping up here and there. And then finally, Rachel does get pregnant, and she has a son, Yosef. And Leah has a couple of more kids, and they're on their way back to Canaan, and I'll get to in a moment. And Rachel is pregnant on the way, and she dies in childbirth, giving birth to the last of the 12 sons, to Benjamin. But the problems that occur later, how Joseph is sold as a slave, is he's the son of the favored wife. When the tribes of Israel get divided, into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. In essence, it's under the leadership of Ephraim, who's one of the sons of Joseph. And Judah in the south, son of Rachel. Of Leah, excuse me. Joseph, the son of Rachel, Ephraim through Rachel, and Judah through Leah in the south. So the conflict is mentioned throughout the Tanakh. There is this conflict between the northern tribes and southern tribes. Many modern scholars who don't take the stories as historical facts see them as explanatory of what happened later on. Why was this animosity? Why was this conflict between the different tribes? Be that as may, though, you could say it all goes back to Jacob tricking his father Isaac. And had he not done that, who knows what the history would have been. There's another famous midrash to share with you. The last daughter, the child that Leah has is a daughter, who figures in next week's Torah portion. And the story goes that when she was pregnant this would have been her seventh child. So she has 6 already, so she's got half the tribes of Israel under her belt. And each one of the others have 2 or 1 at that stage, getting 2. So she was pregnant with a boy, but she prayed so that she would not have another son to make 13 of the tribes. And so that's why Leah had a girl, and Rachel has a boy. Right? So who says you can't switch before birth? I don't know. Okay. So towards the end of the Torah portion, we read how Jacob says, it's time for me to go home. And Lavan's, and he says, I need to make a deal that all the animals that come out one way, spotted, speckled, it's a little confusing how it all works in. Those would go to Jacob, and the others would go to Lavan. So Lavan, to trick his son-in-law Jacob, makes sure he clears out all the animals that are the ones that would go to Jacob in the future. And so Jacob sets up some rods by the watering troughs, and they are cut on them, so they're spotted and speckled, as it were. And so when the sheep and the rams go to drink, and the goats and what's the female goat? None of you. Oh, anyway, the goats they get together at the water as well. And so then they have lots of kids who are speckled and spotted and that sort of thing. And so Jacob gets a whole lot, and Lavan's other sons aren't real happy. And so Jacob says to his wives, look, things aren't going well. I say, yeah, all right. So they set out to go back to the land of Canaan. Lavan chases after them. God comes to him in a dream. He says, keep your hands off. Okay. And Lavan, when he finally does catch up to Jacob, we're told that Rachel had taken his household gods, the teraphim, and Lavan accuses Jacob of stealing them. And Jacob says, if somebody stole them, they should die. Their life should be forfeit. Okay. And so they go through everything, and they finally get to the tent of Rachel, and Rachel's hidden these little teraphim, apparently very small things, under the blanket she's on, and she tells her father, I'm the way with women, and I can't get up. And so he doesn't discover them. But of course, who dies in childbirth not long after that?
She does.
She does. because Jacob said, whoever stole them, their life was forfeit. So the rabbis say, be careful what you say. No matter, even if you think it's not going to come true, sometimes they had very strong belief in the power of speech. When we would say something, how that would be understood. Okay. So, still it's not working. Why? So we ended with that account to make a treaty. Each goes their way, end of Lavan in our story, and that sets the stage for next week, where Jacob and Esau are going to get together. Okay, so that's the Torah portion of this week. All right. So before I forget, I will remind you that the exam is next week. The way I will do it is I have to go through everything. I will email you in advance the test. You can take it at home. John, I assume everybody here is honest. Yeah, right. And if you have a significant other that's involved with this whole process, they take the test as well. Okay, everyone takes the test. Every couple is, if you're a couple, both sides take the test. Then what happens is Wednesday night, we will go over it. And what I usually do, I give you a separate answer sheet along with the questions, and you just give me the answer sheet so I can record the good and the bad and the ugly. And we usually finish a little bit early that way. So I know somebody asked me they were not going to be here next week because they had a business thing or something. And so you can follow on line later on and get the answers that way. Okay, is that clear? And you saw what the test would be like. I think it's usually between 75 and 100 questions. Usually multiple choice, match, true, false, right of full paragraph. Oh, while I'm on the subject of tests, that reminds me. This past week, Professor Israel Frankus, whom I'm sure none of you have ever heard of, but Dr. Frankus was a teacher of Talmud at the Jewish Theological Seminary where I was a student. And I was at the seminary, 4 years on campus, 1 year in Israel. So of the 5 years, 3 years I studied with him, at least one class, not two. But the first year that I was with him, and I shared this with his wife because he passed this week, that he was famous for his tests. Basically, what he did was say everything learned the last semester, I think is the best way to describe it. We sat down for the exam. Some people went away for lunch, came back after lunch to write the exam. Some wrote it through lunch. Some went home that night. Some came back the next morning to finish the test. And since it was Hanukkah time, Tova Frankus, his wife, brought us sufganiyot to eat as we were taking the exam. He never could write a good exam. He was a great teacher, but exams are terrible. But so I promise you, that's why I just do. I don't know how to properly grade an essay. I really don't. Never have understood how to grade essays correctly. So I usually avoid those and simple fill in the blank, mostly kind of stuff. Okay. We got up to page 22, right? The letter pay. Yeah, if I recall correctly. Everybody has their book with them tonight? Oh, wow. Interestingly enough, this letter is usually referred to as the letter pay, which is the pronunciation it takes when it has a dot in it. Just like the letter bet, when there is a dot in it, there's one way of saying it. It's an air stop. The letter pay When there is no air stop, there's no dot in it, it's an F sound. So, because if you say P, you put your lips together, right? And if you don't quite put your lips together, you try to make the same sound, you get a, you spit air out a little bit to make the P sound, right? There's fancy words for that. I don't know them. Ask my daughter-in-law. So pay means you stop the air. Fe means you don't stop the air. When there's a vowel sound preceding the letter pay, it normally drops that dot and has the F quality to it. When it's at the beginning of a word, it will have the P sound to it. Okay, and we will learn later on there's a final form of the letter pay, which is always a fe at the end of a word. I don't think it ever has a P sound at the end of a word. Okay, so P as in Pesach, P is in Peter, Paul, primary, purposeful, any letter P that you can think of. All right, not psychology, which is psychologia. Okay, line number 1, we have pa, ho, hu, pay, pi, po, huh. Right? 2, pen, ben, pot, par, pach, pain. By the way, pot is not pot, it's bread. Just for your elucidation. Line number 3, paru, mapa, umapa, hur, parat. Line 4, abba, paro, paam, mapam, liparan. Line number 5, poel, pual, poal, amen, parochet. Line 6, para, peirot, berura, berera, panai. 7, le'am, mapatcha, mapecha, ha'arocha, parperet. Parperet. Okay, so we're working on the blessing for the wine, borei pri hagafen. So we've got the pay and we've got the resh. So we're going to work on the sound at the end, which is the E, chirik. Again, there are 2 forms of the E sound, vowel, where it's written on page 23. The long version, which is on the left-hand side there, it has a dot under the previous letter, then the letter yud follows. That's technically a long vowel. When it's short, it just has the dot under the letter. Okay? So if a letter pay has a dot under it, it's P. Li, B, all right? Re. So, and if it has the yud following it, when you pronounce it, it's going to be pronounced the same. It deals with grammar. There's a distinction, but we're not worrying about that so much. Okay. So line number 1, li, p, re, me, be, he, e. Okay. 2, im, imi, uri, eli, libi. 3, by, yeet, bayit, bait, I, yil, ayil. They're teaching you a couple words here. Bayit and ayil. Ayil's a ram. Bayit's a house. 4, eton, rimon, Rabim, Bechorim, Horim. We're now using real words. All right. Eton is a newspaper. Rimon is a pomegranate. It's also is a modern Hebrew word for a hand grenade. In English, you have a pineapple. In Hebrew, it's a rimon, pomegranate. Rabim is many. Bechorim, the firstborn. Horim, parents. All right. So we're not going to worry about you learning these words, what they are, but just understand that these are real words now, mostly. All right, line number 5. Elim, Olamim, Roim, Pe'alim, Rimon. 6. Mayim, Bamayim, Arbaim, Miluim, Limon. Can anybody figure out what a limon is? Lemon. Very good. You know what a mappa is? A mappa actually means a cloth, but it's also used for a map. Okay. Line number 7. Leumi, Olim, Orchim, Perachim, Purim. And the word peri means fruit. It's a strange formula seeming word, but it means a fruit. Right? Perot is the plural form. All right. So we're still working on our bracha, our blessing. So we have the last word of the blessing over wine is the gofen, the vine. It has a gimel in it. Gimel and gamal, right? A camel. The original way the gimel was written in the older Hebrew was sort of like an L on an angle, upside down L on an angle. So you sort of get the snot in the neck of a camel. That's why it was gimel. Now in Hebrew, we don't have a j. The sound j does not exist in Hebrew. It does in Arabic. And of course it does in English. So sometimes in modern Hebrew, when you need to make a j sound, they will use the gimel with a little slash by it, telling you to pronounce it a different way. But the G in Hebrew, the gimel in Hebrew is always a G sound, g, and Haggadah. Unless it's treated in some special way, they'll mark it out. But I don't think you're gonna have to worry too much about that. Okay. So gimel, it's the third letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, and the fourth letter is Dalet, or Dalet. And so alpha, beta, gamma, delta, the Greek. See the names and the letters. Okay. So it's always going to be a hard, is that a hard G?
Hard G.
Hard G. Okay, good. Line number 1. Ye, guy, ga, ga, gay, gu, go. Line 2. Gan, gar, gor, gam, gercha, ganech, hagan. Right? 3. Uga, ogain, garu, piloni, gonain. 4. Peluga, peleg, hagarim, hagamal, and geirut. Anybody know what hagamal means? Think about it. The camel.
Camel.
That's the camel. Hagamal. Ha in front of a word in Hebrew is the. Okay. Well, I mentioned it before. Hebrew uses lots of prefixes and suffixes in at least biblical Hebrew and still to a large measure modern Hebrew. So instead of a separate word for the, you put a hey in front of a word. That gives you the bayit, habayit, the house. Gamal, camel, hagamal. Aim, mother, ha'aim, the mother. Okay. Okay. Line number 5. Gercha, gina, ge'eh, Galut bara. 6. Gaal Teiman Bochim Horeg Bonim. 7. Gaon Gomel Gimalim Magain Ligmor. The word Magain means shield or defender. What do we call the Jewish star in Hebrew?
Magen David.
Magain David, the shield of David. That's where it comes from. The word Magain means shield. And in Israel, the service which parallels the Red Cross is Magain Adom, Magain David Adom, the red Jewish star. Okay, which unfortunately is having a lot of work these days. Okay, page 25, the letter Fe. Remember, a minute ago it was pay, air stop. Now, since it's in the middle of the word of Geffen, which is a vine, the before it means the dot drops out. So instead of Geppen, we say Geffen. All right, so without the dot, it's going to be the F sound, Fe. The final form, which of course appears only at the end of the word, once again, what it does is the bottom tail comes down. See, if you look at the regular Fe, the beginning or the middle of the word, it circles around. It comes around at the bottom. When it becomes the final form, that little left hand, it's curving left. Instead of curving, goes straight down. That's how you can see it that way. Okay. But it will only be at the end of a word that way. Otherwise, it would be the other. And at the end of the word, I don't think there ever is a word that isn't a Fe. I could be wrong. I've been known to do that. Don't tell my wife I'm never wrong. I tell her. Okay. And she knows better. Line number 1. Fe, they, fo, fu, fi, fo, fi, fi. Right, now that could not exist in normal Hebrew because you cannot have a Fe at the beginning of a word. Right? So it's nonsensical right now. The letters that drop the dots cannot, without a dot, cannot be at the beginning of a word. At the beginning of the word is always going to have a dot in it, unless there's a vowel sound at the end of the previous word. Okay. Line number 2. Nof, af, oaf, goof, tof, agaf, rofef. 3. Refet, heref, ofeif, mifoar, lifaro. So here's an example. The name of the king in Egypt in Hebrew is Paro. In English, Pharaoh. Right? In Hebrew, it's Paro because it's the beginning of the word, not the f sound. So Paro, if it's just Paro, it would be that. But if you have some kind of prefix added to Paro, like to Paro, it becomes not Paro, but Pharaoh. Live Pharaoh. Paro, it becomes, you could say El Paro, to Paro, Pharaoh, or you can say Le Pharaoh. So when you have the prefix, the dot's going to drop out. There's certain explanations of how that comes into being. We won't worry about it. Okay. Line number 4. Nafal, Niflu, Gafrur, Halaf, Plugim, Panim. 5. Panayich, Lifanai, Egrof, Turcha, Pitamim, Nifal. 6. Hifal, Lirofef, Rofe, Mirpa'a, Refu'a. Just again to show you how Hebrew works, and I'm not worried about you remembering, but the third word here, Resh Vav Pei Aleph, Rofe, is a doctor. Reish Pei Aleph has the meaning of healing, of curing. So Rofeh is one who cures, a doctor. Mirpa'ah is an infirmary, or what's another place where you go? Not hospital. It's, Beit Cholim is used for hospital, but it's a clinic, an infirmary. The camp, it was the Mirpa'ah, and camp was always called the Marp in Hebrew. Rifu'ah means healing. Right? So all of those because they built out of the Reish Pei Aleph root. And that's why the angel Raphael is said to be the angel that cures. Rapha, curing, El, God, cure for God, the God's curing. Okay. So once you learn the basic roots, you can sometimes figure out the meaning of a word that you've never seen, or at least you can see how it's built. Just like if you know a little bit of Latin, sometimes you can understand what centimeter comes from 10, centum, and meta to measure. All right. So if you remember your Latin, and nobody here took Latin besides me, right? He did. Yeah, that's right. I had 4 in high school.
Wow.
Had 2 in high school.
For the prayer, like
El na refanala. All right. All right. So all of those come from that idea. Okay. Line number 7. Aleph, Aluf, Hanof, Aroch, Nofef, Be'af. And so the word is Hagafen, the vine. So let's turn over to the next page. I should have brought some grape juice or something better, but I didn't. So we now can recite the blessing over wine. So let's all read it together on page 26. We say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Okay. One just little note again, it's not something I expect you to remember per se. The word is geffen, vine. And if we're just standing there by itself, you would say hagefen. In biblical Hebrew, at the end of a sentence, end of a verse, or sometimes in the middle of the verse, it gets accented a bit. Geffen should be, the accent's on the first syllable, geffen. But because of the certain rules of Hebrew, the 2 segols at a word like that the first one becomes an avowel. Hagafen, not hagefen, but hagafen. So in Ashkenazic circles, which most Jews in this part of the world are mostly of Ashkenazic background, we say borei pri hagafen. But if you know somebody who's of Sephardic background, they say borei pri hagefen. Neither one is wrong. That's just a question of which, if you follow that rule or not in the blessing. Just like at this time of year, we have Moshev HaRuach, Umorid HaGeshem. Right? Some say Morid HaGashem. Again, it's the same thing. Is it accented there because HaGeshem or HaGashem? Neither right or wrong, just a different way of doing it. Okay? So we have now got our first blessing under our belt. This Friday night, your homework assignment is to be sure you say the blessing over the wine, at least that part of it, the bracha. I don't care who else is doing it, but you have to say it with them then. Okay? So you can say Borei Pri Hagafen. And anytime you drink wine, wine is a special drink. It was honored in Jewish tradition. Almost all of our rituals require wine as part of the ritual. A brit milah, a wedding, the blessings after the wedding ceremony. All of these require wine as part of the ceremony. When we welcome the Sabbath, we do it traditionally. We try to have wine to do it. We say goodbye to the Sabbath, we have wine to do it. We welcome the Yom Tov, we have wine. We say goodbye to the Yom Tov, we have wine. It was regarded as a special drink. And so whenever you have wine, it makes no difference in the middle or beginning of a meal, you say the blessing over wine. If you're having a full meal, you don't have to say the blessing after, the special blessing after wine. But if you're just having a drink of wine, there's a different blessing that you say after that. Okay, 'tis the season. I know here in Canada, it starts November 1st, October 2nd. We're going to talk about Hanukkah, or Chanukkah, depending upon your pronunciation. That's the problem with a name like Hanukkah. They don't know how to spell it in English. A couple of things to understand, first of all. Hanukkah has nothing to do with Christmas. It doesn't have the same kind of religious significance. I mean, I understand in the Christian world, some people take the religious element of it very seriously. Others don't. But at least the mythos of Christmas is the birth of Jesus, the Christ, the Messiah, right? So in Christian terms, Christmas, if you're thinking of it as the birth of one part of the Trinity that's significant to you, it takes greater import in your religious belief. Hanukkah has none of that. Hanukkah is post-biblical. It doesn't appear in the Bible. Hanukkah is not a day of rest. Hanukkah doesn't have, in the days of the Second Temple, there was no special sacrifice for Hanukkah. The observance of Hanukkah essentially was you have a nice meal, maybe. You light the Hanukkah candles, which we'll talk about in a minute. That was it. None of these gifts are 8 days, nights. Hanukkah, what happened with Hanukkah in terms of the way the world sees it and saw it and sees it still, is that because it comes around Christmas, it becomes part of what is called affectionately the December dilemma. So Jewish parents feeling guilty, feeling imposed on, feeling needing to do something to match what's going on in the non-Jewish world, played up Hanukkah, a gift every night or what have you. Good. But like I say, it doesn't have that real import. And as a matter of fact, we almost didn't have the holiday. All right, so first of all, we're going to look at the history. Hanukkah is post-biblical because it celebrates the events that take place in the 2nd century before the Common Era. 164, I'm losing the... 465, it depends on exactly how you date it. So a little bit of background. Everybody's heard of Alexander the Great, right? Yeah. Anybody not hear of Alexander the Great? Also known as Alexander the Grape, but that's a wine that's got a lot of high note. Anyway, so Alexander the Great from Macedonia conquers the Middle East, gets all the way through Persia and stops in India. And then soon after, he dies. Upon his death, his empire gets divided up. Part is Macedonia and Greece. Part is Asia Minor, Syria. Part is Egypt. We're not concerned with Greece right now, so say goodbye to that part. I don't even remember who's the general who got it. The general in Egypt was known as Ptolemy. PT, by the way, again, when those strange words, Ptolemy. His descendant was Cleopatra. She's a descendant of Ptolemy, one of the generals of Alexander the Great, who got Egypt as his bailiwick. And the Syria, Asia Minor, went to Seleucid. All right. Poor Judea, at the end of the Persian period, it was a province under Persian rule, pretty much left to its own devices, as much of Persian provinces were. As long as you paid your taxes, and if they needed to get some men for the army, you did that. We'll let you do what you wanted to do. And it was pretty much run by the priests, the Kohanim, who were essentially the upper class of that period of history. Now, what happens is it becomes a bone of contention who's going to run Judah or Judea. And at one stage of history, so the Seleucids conquered Judea from the Ptolemies, from Egypt, even tried to conquer Egypt. And famously, when one of the Seleucid kings that goes down to Egypt, apparently this is when Rome is starting to show up on the scene, and basically says to Antiochus, if you go any further, you're going to have to deal with Rome. And so it goes back. Now, wars are expensive. Nobody thinks about it, but it costs a lot of money to have a war. So you've got, the money's got to come from somewhere, and usually it comes from a lot of it comes from taxes, or from whatever the ruler can get their hands on. And one of the places where money was kept and precious items were to be found were in temples, whether they be Jewish or idolatrous. We read about how all kinds of gold was used in the temple. We read about how the tithes, when people sent their tithes, a shekel, a half shekel to the Jerusalem, they had room where they put all the coinage in. If you needed to keep money, you could take it to the local temple, and they would hold it for you. And I don't know if they charged for whatever. I don't know what they did in those days. Okay. So we know that one of the things that Antiochus, the bad guy of our story, did was he raided a lot of temples, including the one in Jerusalem, to take the money. That didn't go over very well with the local people. But pretty much, again, internally, the Seleucids had left running the province, the country, whatever you want to call it, then really a province, in the hands of the locals. Whatever they did, they did. I don't care. Pay your money, end of the story. Okay? And so there was often competition, surprise, surprise, as to who's going to run the country, the province. So it was pretty much ruled by the high priest. So how do you get to be the high priest? That was a little problematic. And that's where the foreign kings and emperors sometimes stuck their nose. And we know, and I don't remember all the ins and outs, and it's too much for you to try and remember either. But what happens is, Antiochus needs money. So how does he get? One of the ways he gets money is from taxes. Now, we have a very simple way of doing it today, right? We fill out a form, we send our money in, and most of the time, the people in charge of the taxes don't bother you. You assume you're honest. And if you're not honest, they check up on you, and you find the mistakes you make, and you pay through the nose to pay up the penalties. Okay. That's how it's done. Those days, they had what is called tax farming. Tax farming is this. Onias says to Antiochus, tell you what, I will give you X amount of drachmas for the taxes of Judea this year, 100 million drachmas. I will pay the taxes. And he's not doing it out of the goodness of his heart. He is then allowed to go and raise that money from the locals. So, of course, he's got to raise more than the 100,000 drachmas that he sent to Antiochus. And that's where they made their money. So certainly there was competition as to who was going to rule the roost. Okay. So you have this going on, rivalries. Then you have also the reality that when you have an empire, you have an outside ruler, there is a marked tendency for the upper classes of whatever locality that is to begin to ape the manners and styles of the rulers. Think of India. Why do they play cricket in India? Of all things, to import cricket? Because the British played cricket. Why English is so important in India? Because the British spoke English. A lot of things in India were influenced by the fact that the British ruled India, or had at least a major control over it, for so long. So the upper classes amongst the Jews of Judea began to ape some of the Greek ways of life. For example, athletics was very important in the Greek world. And they have these Olympics, and big Olympics, smaller Olympics. And so you have the introduction of these games and competitions into the various localities, even if that wasn't part of their original heritage. The locals take it up, but who takes it up? It goes to a large measure the upper class. Now, these guys, the priests, some of them, sons of the priests, well, let's go to Tyre for the local Olympics and we'll compete. Well, there are a couple of things with that. First of all, only men went to the Olympics. No women were in the stands, at least no woman of high quality. Because the men did it naked. Okay. Now, at the beginning of the games, there is usually a sacrifice to the gods. Sometimes, how do the priests avoid that, or did they say, okay, you're going there, so play along? But there was also something else. Jewish males were circumcised. They were the only ones there circumcised. And if you're the only one standing around circumcised amongst everybody else, you're going to start to feel self-conscious. And so we know it's recorded in the book of Maccabees that some underwent a very painful procedure to try and hide the fact that they had been circumcised. Okay? And it's stretching part of the skin of the penis in order to pull it down to make it like you were not circumcised. Okay? Taking it off is painful. Trying to put it back is painful. All right. But fortunately, you do it when you're very young for the guys usually, and so they don't complain very much. You know the story. Two kids are in the hospital. One's Cohen and the other is McTavish, or McGillicuddy, whatever nice Christian name you want. And so McGillicuddy says to Cohen, "What are you in for?" And he says, "Tonsillectomy." "Oh, no big deal. You get your tonsils taken out. When you get through the surgery, you get ice cream and Jell-O. You have a good time, And so Cohen says to the other fellow, "What are you in here for?" He says, "I'm being circumcised." He says, "I couldn't walk for a year after I was circumcised." Sometimes takes a minute to fit in. Says, well, all right. So they wanted to introduce some of these Greco-Roman, I keep saying Greco-Roman, it's not really Roman at this point, the Greek Hellenistic, is the term used, Hellenistic ideas into the everyday life of Judea. So now you have the more traditional minded who are aghast at such terrible things. You have the run-of-the-mill people who, that's crazy stuff, but that's what do you expect from these upper-class snobs. And you have the upper-class snobs. So now, Antiochus is dealing with the threat on the horizon of Rome. dealing with the local threat of Ptolemy. So what's the best way to unite your empire? To really get the culture into one harmonious grouping. So to push Hellenistic ideas and visions of the way life should be becomes part of the Hellenistic program of Antiochus. It becomes part of the program of a certain element in the priestly class, trying to bring in Hellenistic elements into Judaism. Now, there's debate as to the exact order of events, what takes place first, second. Traditionally, in Jewish tradition, the way it's usually said is that Antiochus seeks to impose Hellenism, bans circumcision, insists that the Jews worship the Greek gods, that they sacrifice swine on the altar. And some of the high priests and the priestly class go along with this. Some of the people don't know what to do, and then there's some very pious Hasidim, as they're called in those days, who are really all upset about it. And there is a family in a city called Modin. The father of the family is Matityahu, Mattathias. And according to the way it's recorded in one of the Book of Maccabees, or a couple of, a local guy comes to impose this Hellenistic program on the locals, wants them to sacrifice to the idol in the middle of town. You're not supposed to sacrifice outside of the temple, much less the town, and to a swine. And so one of the Jewish guys goes up to do it. Matityahu kills him and raises up the banner of revolt. He doesn't last a long time. He dies. He's got 5 sons, and his son Judah the Maccabee, ends up leading the fight against the Greeks and against those Jews who sided with the Greeks. It's also, to a certain measure, a civil war. And what had happened is, in the interim, the temple in Jerusalem had been profaned. They offered swine on the altar, all these terrible things. But Judah and his brothers are able to be victorious. Eventually, they conquer most of Jerusalem, including the Temple Mount. But overlooking the temple is a citadel where those Jews who sided with the Greeks and so the Greeks took shelter, and that they couldn't conquer. And the way it's described, and the way the story you will hear in all the Hebrew schools, they'll tell you, so the Jews come under Judah the Maccabee, they come to Jerusalem, they're all so happy, we won the battle, they come to the temple, oy, 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 what a mess this is, they clean it up, there's the altar there, what are we going to do with the altar? It's been profaned, we don't know what to do, so they take the stones that were used to make the altar, and they go bury it somewhere, and say, when a prophet comes, a true prophet, he will tell us what to do with them. This is already telling you that age of prophecy is over. They build a new altar. Now comes time to rededicate the temple, and lo and behold, there's not enough oil to light the menorah, because all the oil had been made profaned, it had been made impure. All that was left is this little cruse of oil, whatever that means. And so they lit the menorah, and the light, which is only enough for maybe one day or one night, there are various discussions on that, lasted for 8 days, during which time they could squeeze more oil to relight the lamp and keep it going. Therefore, we celebrate Hanukkah for 8 days because of the miracle of the lamp of Hanukkah. Okay? Now, there are a few holes in the traditional Jewish story of it, and we'll come to that in a moment, but it makes a nice story. But remember, it's celebrating a military victory crowned by a miraculous event, but God is not really fighting the battle. You can always say every battle God's involved with it, right? You make your plans, and who knows what's going to happen. And so the divine assistance, one can say, is there. But God doesn't bring down lightning to destroy the armies of the Greeks, right? There's no crossing of the Dead Sea, the Sea of Reeds, excuse me. all intent and purposes, it looks like the normal miraculous kind of battle victory, but not out of human possibility. Okay? So now let's muddy the waters. There are several books called Books of Maccabees. Actually, we do have one of the Hebrew ones. They did find eventually the Hebrew in the Chanukkah the December, but they were only thing we knew about them was in Greek. They didn't survive in Hebrew, except, as I say, there was a manuscript apparently in the Cairo Geniza in Hebrew. So it really kind of went to the side, because at a certain point in time, Greek no longer was part of the Jewish educational project. But in the early centuries, before the destruction of the Second Temple, there was a lot of Greek influence around. So in the books of Maccabees, they make the point that the year of the final, when they conquered Jerusalem, they could not celebrate the holiday of Sukkot. The 8 days, 7 days of Sukkot, the 8 days Shmini Atzeret. When they come to the temple, indeed, yes, they had to deal with the altar. They lit torches, made iron menorahs of some kind. And because they had not celebrated Sukkot, on the 25th day of Kislev, the very same day that the temple had been profaned, they celebrated 8 days of Sukkot, as it were. Thus, according to one of the books, I forget which one, I apologize, Maccabees, it was 8 days because they couldn't celebrate the 8 days of Sukkot. When King Solomon dedicated the first temple, it was an 8-day dedication ceremony after the 8 days of Sukkot. So there are lots of possibilities of why the book of Maccabees, none of the book of Maccabees, nor the Josephus, who mostly relies on Maccabees for his history, as well as rabbinic sources, mention the story of the oil. To further muddy the waters, the Mishnah, we will talk in more depth about the Mishnah later on. The Mishnah has various volumes dedicated to certain things. There's one volume on the observance of the Sabbath, the Sechet Shabbat, one on Sukkot. There's one which deals with a lot of laws of Purim, Megillah. And there's one that deals with laws of Yom Tov, Masechet Beitza. And there are all kinds and other tractates that deal with civil law and all those kinds of things. There is not a single volume that talks about Hanukkah. Okay? And in passing, in a couple of places, Hanukkah is mentioned. But the Mishnah does not dedicate any real time to it. So that in the Babylonian Talmud, when it talks about Hanukkah, it says, "My Hanukkah." What's Hanukkah? And they give the basic outline of the story, the traditional story. The Jews defeated the Greeks. They rededicated the temple. All they found was one bit of oil, a cruse of oil. They lit it in the temple. It burned for 8 days. And we celebrate with Hallel and rejoicing till today. Now, a lot of modern historians look at all of this evidence and they suggest the following: without the oil, it happened or didn't happen, I can't know. No reason to say it didn't happen, but there's no evidence, but that doesn't matter. Okay. But what is more striking is the fact that the rabbis played it down. And it's thought the following: when the Mishnah is compiled by Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi around close to the year 200 of the Common Era, 70 years earlier was the terrible Bar Kokhba revolt, which was worse for the Jews than the Second Temple being destroyed, really, because they lost out in horrible ways. The last thing that the rabbis of that era wanted was Jews to think, you know what, we can be like the Maccabees, which is what Bar Kokhba thought, we can beat the Romans. And the rabbis wanted a more pacifistic, or more pacific attitude to prevail. We're a small group. Yeah, God helps us and God protects us, but don't ask too much of God. So they may have intentionally downplayed it and played up the miraculous story. So even the prayer for Hanukkah doesn't talk about it. We add into the prayers, doesn't go into great depth on explaining that, we should follow the Maccabees. What also comes out of the Hanukkah story is, and this is found in the books of the Maccabees, and it's found in rabbinic treatment of it as well. It was the first time on record, anyway, that martyrdom became a religious ideal, to die for your faith. One of the famous stories that's found in both rabbinic circles and in the book of Maccabees is Hannah and her 7 sons. And the way the story is told, they're brought before Antiochus, who tells them to worship the idol. And for each son in turn refuses, and he's tortured and killed until it comes to the last child. And the king is feeling, a little guilty. He says, tell you what, I'll throw my ring down on the floor and you can pick it up and it'll look like you're bowing down to the idol and I won't have to kill you. And he says no. So he's killed, and Hannah celebrates what her children did. Maccabee says that the rulers had outlawed circumcision. And if anybody was circumcised, the woman and the child were thrown off the walls of the city. So you have this element of strong martyrdom, which we don't see spelled out in other literatures of earlier than that, which thus becomes an important element for many others later in history. And before I get this, another thing is, what we find today is that initial struggle between the Jewish element of standing different, standing alone, being different from the other, is even attacked today from people within the Jewish community. Because the Jews rejected all the great things of the Greek world. Where would we be where would Western civilization be without all these Greek ideals? And the Jews rejected it. And they still reject some of this stuff. Now, of course, if the Jews had not rejected it, they would have disappeared as Jews and would have a Hanukkah story anyway. But I know, and there are those there's a Reform rabbi in town who does it all the time, who basically doesn't want to celebrate Hanukkah because the major message of Hanukkah is we are different. We celebrate our difference. Now, reality is much more complicated than that, because after the story is a much longer, detailed story. If you want to read about it, it's fascinating what goes on until the time of the Romans. But they eventually get their independence. The Maccabees' descendants become the kings of Israel. They adopt Greek names. Even the rabbis later on often had Greek names. If you go to the cemeteries where the rabbis were buried, you find sarcophagi with Greek names on them. Greek certainly influenced Judaism without any question. But it was an attempt, I think, to decide what was going to be the major element, or as I do it, the yardstick, was whatever in Judaism could be fitted into the Greek mold, that was okay. But whatever could not fit into that Greek mold, you got rid of. Circumcision, for example. Kashrut. One God. Or, as Judaism developed it, you have Judaism and its traditions, that's the mold. And whatever you can take in from the outside world that can fit into that mold, that can help strengthen that Jewish identity and that Jewish mold, that we accept, we bring into Judaism. But what cannot fit into it, we reject. And the fact of the matter is, every Jew on this planet, and if they're Jews on other planets as well, I'm sure, really lives on a spectrum. Right? At one end of the spectrum, you have those Jews who want nothing whatsoever to do with the outside world. They have their own little ghettos. They dress differently, at least they think they dress differently, because people don't dress like that today. They did 300 years ago, but who cares about that now? And on the other end of the spectrum, you have those Jews who say, yeah, I have Jewish heritage. I come from Jewish background. I like matzo balls, but that's it. I'm a Canadian. And if there's anything that interferes with my being a Canadian, forget it. And everybody else is somewhere between those two extremes. And that's what you are. You yourselves are going to find your place on that spectrum. And how you define yourself is how you're going to lead your Jewish life. You either tilt towards one end or the other. The middle's very hard. Middle never holds. That's why the extremists always win. Okay. All right, so with that historical analysis and that little gung-ho stuff, we got a little bit more that I'm going to talk about in another minute. But so how do we celebrate Hanukkah today? So the story of the oil becomes the major impact. So the Talmud even discusses a disagreement between the schools of Hillel and Shammai as to how you're supposed to light the Hanukkah menorah. According to the school of Shammai, the first night of Hanukkah, you light 8 candles, or 8 oil lamps. Second night, you light 7. Third, 6. You go down in numbers. Because after all, if the oil was all there the first night, it must have gone down somewhere. School of Hillel says no. The first night you light 1, then 2, then 3. All right? Until you get to all 8 are burning. And of course, we follow the school of Hillel all the time. And even that is a second layer, because the beginning of the story is, how do you celebrate Hanukkah? Each night you light a lamp. So the first night of Hanukkah, you light an oil lamp. Second night of Hanukkah, you light an oil lamp. Third night of Hanukkah, you light an oil lamp. No matter how many people in the house, you light an oil lamp. Then others say, no, each person. I'm a hadran. Better than that is each person lights a lamp. So you got 8 people in your household, 8 lamps the first night. Second night, 8 lamps. The third night, 8 lamps. And then comes the school of Hillel and Shammai says, I'm a hadran, and I'm a hadran. A real way to celebrate it is either starting with 8 and go down, 1 going up. We follow Hillel. Now, so we light the Hanukkah candles. A lot of people use wax candles. You can use oil. It's much nicer with oil if you can do it. We have an extra candle or an extra oil lamp, because we're not supposed to make use of these lamps. These are to celebrate the holiday. Not that to give me extra light. Of course, in our day and age, it hardly matters, right? You got your lights on and you got a Hanukkah menorah. What good is that going to do you? Right? But in those days, that was the way you lit a house. So when we light the candles, there's a paragraph in Hebrew, you can say it in English. These candles that we light, or these lamps we light, for the miracles that performed, we have no right to make use of them, except to look upon them and see them. So we always light an extra lamp. So if we need light, we rely on the extra lamp. Okay. Ideally, it would be put on your front door on the opposite side of the mezuzah. You walk in your house, which side of the door is your mezuzah going to be on? Your right-hand side. Good. Remember that for the test. So therefore, you would put the menorah on the left-hand side as you're walking in. And you'll see that in Israel. And I had one my father-in-law, blessed memory, had, but I could never get the candles to burn in it. It always blew out. The wind's too much here. Most people light it inside. If you live in a house so that you got a window onto the street, and the people walking down the street can see it, that's the ideal place to light it. Okay, up until this year, that's what we did in our living room. We had a nice big window, and we put our Chanukkiot there. And in my household, everybody has their own Chanukkah. By the way, the word Chanukkah is the word that is used today for the Hanukkah menorah, because menorah just means a lamp. It can be the 7-branch lamp. It could be the 9-branch lamp. It can just be a light bulb, light. Okay. So you light it. If you live like I do now on the 10th floor, nobody's going to see it out my window. So you light it where the people in the household will be found. Okay, how you do it. When do you light the Chanukkah? The Chanukkah should be lit when the stars come out, 42 minutes after sunset, ideally. And it should burn for a half an hour, at least a half an hour. These little tiny Hanukkah wax candles usually aren't going to last that long. So, you come home from work this time of year here in Toronto, you're coming home at 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, so you light your Chanukkah when you come home from work, that's fine. No problem. Tomorrow, if Hanukkah were tomorrow, no problem. Friday night, what are you going to do? First of all, you should be home before 6:30 at night, Friday night, this time of year. And you can't light it once it's Shabbos. So the order is, you light your Chanukkah, whatever number of candles is the requisite number for that night. Then you light the Shabbos candles. And welcome to Shabbat. But didn't I just say they're supposed to burn a half hour after the stars come out at night? Right? And you light the Hanukkah, the Shabbos candles 18 minutes before sunset. So if you light your Chanukkah just before you light your Shabbos candles, it's not going to burn more than it barely gets into Shabbat. Nowhere near sunset, stars coming out. So you need Hanukkah licht for Friday night that will burn at least an hour and a half. So either get special long ones or you have the oil ones, you put more oil in. How do you light them? You start as you're facing the Chanukkah, ideally, it's outside, but we're not doing that. So you're usually in the window. So it's usually you're looking at your right hand. The first new lamp is on the far right-hand side of the Chanukkah. The second night, you have 2 on the far right side. Then 3, keep moving towards your left. When you light them, you light the newest one first, going to your right. Before we light the Chanukkah, the licht, we say 2 blessings. One is to light the candles. And you know it mostly. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech olam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. Instead of Shabbat, Chanukah. There's also another blessing, Shasa Nisim Lavotem B'Yamim Ahem Bazman Hazeh, perform miracles for our ancestors this time of year. Now, there is a popular debate as to what is the proper food for Hanukkah. Some insist it has to be potato latkes because they're greasy, full of oil, and that reminds us of the oil of the Hanukkah lamp. Others say it should be sufganiyot, which are donuts that are fried in oil with different fillings depending on your taste, and that's oil. So you can have, there's famous debates all the time, which is the best food for Hanukkah. Fact of the matter is neither one of them has anything to do with Hanukkah, but that's nice anyway. Okay, the potatoes weren't known to Israel until after North America was discovered. The other thing that's associated with Hanukkah is the Hanukkah dreidel. All right, and on the dreidel are the letters Nun, Gimel, Hey, and Shin, which stands for the words Nes Gadol Hayasham. A great miracle happened there. Okay? And in Israel, instead of the letter Shin, they put the letter Pei because it wasn't there, it was here. Nes Gadol Hayapo. A great miracle happened here. We say there, they say here. But the truth of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, it comes from the Yiddish. A top is a top. It's a toy to play with the gamble. Okay, that's what it originally was, a little gambling game. And in Yiddish, the letters nun is nisht. Everybody puts their money or their candy or their nuts in the middle of the table. And I spin this dreidel. And if the nun is on top, nisht, I get nothing. If it's the gimel comes up on top, gans, I get all of it. If the hay comes up on top, halb, I get half of it, the pot. If the shin comes up, shup, I have to put one in. That's what it really comes from. But it was a nice way. And you'll hear all kinds of stories. That's what the Jews did when they were really studying Torah, but the Greeks came by to see what they were doing. They were playing with the dreidel so they would know they were really studying Torah. That's a lot of things come. You have traditions that build up, and they have nice stories to go with them. There's nothing wrong with the stories, but historically, there's something else. All right, so now comes a little bit of time for sermons before I let you go. As a Jew, we recognize that our neighbors have a holiday this time of year. And it's a beautiful holiday. Now, when I was a kid, I grew up, my family was the only Jewish family at the elementary school I was attending at that time. And I remember coming home singing a Christmas carol, and my mother said to me, "We don't sing that." And until I was an adult, I hated Christmas carols. Now, as an adult, I can appreciate the musical quality. Okay? We didn't have a Christmas tree. We weren't a very religious family growing up, but God forbid you would have a Christmas tree in a Jewish home. It's their holiday. Let them celebrate their holiday. I'm not jealous. I have my holidays. The non-Jews have their holidays. It's fine. But we have to understand there is a distinction. Now, obviously, people in this class have an issue because there are members of their family or will be members of the family who are Christian. All right? There's nothing wrong with you recognizing that they are celebrating. Ideally, if at all possible, I know it's not always possible, I recognize it. Ideally, you really shouldn't join in the celebration yourself, your family. You talk to your rabbi and you have to feel out your family and how they feel about things and all of that. I understand it's a very difficult issue, one you have to handle with a lot of careful judgment. But ideally, you say, you want to give my kids a gift, so give them a gift at Hanukkah time. And and you want to have a dinner, family dinner, let's do it not on Christmas Day. Right? You want to do the night before, it's not Christmas yet, so it's not such a big deal maybe, or the day after, or do it on Sunday when Christmas is on Friday, or whatever, that sort of thing, if possible. But you have to be able to find and define who you are and what Judaism means. Now, there's some who say, the rabbi, my family's not religious. They don't go to church on Christmas. And my response to that was, that's their loss. Christmas was the Mass of Christ. It was a religious holiday. And if I were Christian, I would really hate what the modern world has done to Christmas. As you know, they've taken the Christ out of Christmas, as some claim. And it's true. And for a Jew to buy into that is to denigrate the holiday of our neighbor. I don't celebrate Christmas. I don't pretend to be part of it, but I also don't gainsay the other people celebrating it. That's why if I go to a store and they say Merry Christmas, I say Merry Christmas back. I have no problem with that. And it's silly to we stupid people gonna say you shouldn't say Merry Christmas to anybody because it's the white Christians things to do. Come on, give me a break. You want to say Merry Christmas? Merry Christmas. You want to say Happy Holiday? Say Happy, whatever you feel like. You know, you feel good. You know, I had to buy coffee yesterday, so there's the Christmas blend. They also put out a holiday blend. It's the same thing, but it does say Christmas on the Starbucks on the wrapping for holiday. So, yeah, I bought the holiday blend, but my wife likes the Keurig, and the only thing I got for the Keurig, she likes the Christmas blend, so I got her the Keurig Christmas blend Keurig cups. I don't care about that. All right, you want to be, that's fine. Sensitivity is nice, but don't be crazy eyed. But you're going to have children in this world that need to know who and what they are. They are either Jewish or they're not Jewish. You can't be Jewish and Christian. You can't be half and half. You're one or the other. And they have to be taught what they are. They have to be taught to respect and honor their neighbors and their holidays, and to expect to be respected and to have our holidays honored. I don't think Hanukkah is equal to Christmas. I don't think by having a Christmas song and a Jewish lousy Hanukkah song in the school presentation is meaningful. First of all, most of the Hanukkah music's terrible. Okay? We have a lot of great Jewish composers, but you know, maybe the liturgy for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Kol Nidre, that's Jewish music, that's beauty. Nobody felt, well, Hanukkah's Hanukkah, spin the dreidel and have a good time. Who's going to write Handel's Messiah for Hanukkah? Fast nicht. So, but you can make it meaningful. You can make it a nice experience, whether you give gifts every night, which eventually kids you hope grow out of it, just to celebrate a little time together with Chanukkah, to sing Ma'ot Tzur and light the lich, and enjoy it for what it is, a celebration of Jewish identity, a celebration of Jewish courage to maintain that identity, a celebration of understanding that we as Jews have nothing to be ashamed of our culture and our heritage, and we can put it up against the best heritages and cultures in the world and stand on our own 2 feet with them. We don't have to adopt their ways. We don't want them to adopt our ways. There's beauty in both, and let them, have that beauty. Okay, that's my sermon for the night. We'll pass the hat around later because it's not Shabbos. Next week, I believe neder by Sunday night or Monday night, I will have the test to you. But can everybody get an email? What would be better, email or on email? Okay, I'll email everybody the test. I'll probably send it on the WhatsApp as well. I'll send them on both. You can throw one out if you don't want it. But please come to class with it filled out, and we'll go over together. Okay? Have a good one and all.
Class will bring it filled out.
Yeah.